Colorado State University has a vested interest in developing profitable and environmentally sound beef production systems that address global challenges. Stakeholder interest in management-intensive grazing has also increased over the last decade, seeking systems that will provide reduced costs and environmental impacts, as well as increasing animal output per acre and land use efficiency. These interests together have spurred the development of this long-term irrigated management-intensive grazing project that plans to evaluate biological and economic processes related to soils, plants, water, and livestock.
So one of the reasons that we undertook this pivot grazing project is in this area there's a lack of available grazing. You can go up into the mountains, but that's a long truck ride, plus the cost of that. And generally there's farm ground around the irrigated areas, but just not much pasture available. So this gave us a chance to have cows close by and accessible so that we could manage them and watch them closely. But then also this allowed us to change the calving season, which really is an important thing. We used to calve in January, February, and March, and then we changed to calving in April, May, and June, which better matches cows to the forage availability and improved calf survival, so we weren't calving in the wintertime. And if we go to the mountains, we're simply not able to do that because the cows would have to calve in the mountains. We would try to artificially inseminate them in the mountains, and those just aren't feasible options. So it really came down to being more efficient cow herd producers, and also it allows us access to these cows year-round for teaching, research, and other activities.
This grazing project takes place on a 200-acre irrigation pivot that is divided into equal quarters that are each planted into a different cool season perennial grass or grass legume mixture. The perennial forage base is being managed intensively, and cattle are being moved once daily. This infrastructure is set up with 3 concentric sets of permanent high tensile fence, while movable polywire fencing and step-in posts are used to divide into smaller acreage pastures based on forage availability. There are 10 permanent waterers installed strategically around the pivot for accessibility and ease of management. Management-intensive grazing, also referred to as MIG, is a strategy that focuses on balancing animal stocking density with forage availability to achieve objectives such as more even grazing patterns, increased nutrient distribution, and more efficient use of the forage base. Another important factor of MIG is having a target amount of residual forage. In the case of this project, is 50%, or take half, leave half. This is an integral part of this system. It allows for quicker regrowth due to having adequate leaf area left over for proper photosynthesis, and it protects the stand longevity. Overgrazing certain cool season species can lead to reduced root systems that ultimately lead to declining stands. Leaving adequate forage behind also means the cattle will not spend as much time in one particular area. On our project, daily moves are generally the norm, but sometimes they'll stay in a paddock for 2 to 3 days, but never longer. After 3 days, cool season grasses will begin to regrow. Grazing regrowth has many negative consequences, including slowing future production. Finally, having a long enough rest period for recovery is essential. Leaving enough residual and having an adequate rest period, which for us is between 25 and 35 days, allows for quick regrowth and healthy yields.
Management-intensive grazing, to me that brings up a whole number of positive benefits. And one of the big things is it puts the emphasis on management. I really like how Jim Garish put that together. It's management-intensive, And so it's not necessarily intensive grazing, it's an intensive management. And that really allows you to put together the grass component with the cow component. And it's just this big balancing act.
One of the greatest lessons I've learned while working on this management-intensive grazing project is that leaving forage behind is never wasted. As a matter of fact, it's advantageous to leave forage behind. Plants put on biomass in two different ways. They take in sunlight and photosynthesize, and they take up water and nutrients from their roots. So what happens when you overgraze is you take away that plant's ability to photosynthesize. When you reach that 50% utilization, 60, 70, 80%, you also cause root growth to decrease. And what that does is directly impact your bottom line and your forage yield and productivity in your system. The objectives of this project are to collect data on forage quality, yield, and botanical composition of the species mixtures. In other words, what nutritional value are we providing the herd, how much are we producing, and how are these mixtures being affected over time by grazing selectivity? Secondly, we are quantifying baseline soil quality by measuring physical, biological, chemical, and nutrient factors to measure change over time, utilizing a program called the Soil Management Assessment Framework. We are really interested to know how a perennial pasture system with management-intensive grazing strategies can impact the soil. And lastly, we are going to perform an economic analysis comparing intensively managed perennial forage systems to several traditional alternatives, such as irrigated cropping systems or shipping cattle to mountain pastures for summer grazing.
I think the bigger picture we want to explore is how would a producer put a pivot like this into their beef production system, especially if there's someone that has maybe access to dryland range and grazing. And some of the ideas are, instead of running cows and calves out here, maybe we would run stocker cattle, or maybe we would run cows early in the year, send them off to dryland pasture during the summer, come back on stockpiled grasses, or maybe we put their weaned calves out here in the fall. So that's really the big question, is how do we kind of fit this into an overall production system? And part of that, again, being in the West, is the drought risk management piece of it. So how can you consistently have a pivot that's in perennial grasses that you fit into your production system, but you really take advantage of it and leverage it in the time of severe drought and very limited forage on dry land, when otherwise you'd probably have to sell your cows?
Probably one of the big ones that we dealt with this year in the spring. It's just difficult to keep up with that early spring growth. No matter how hard you try, how quickly you rotate, that's what we really want to try to do, is quickly rotate in the spring. That grass, when it gets ready to joint, put on that seed head, it just goes so fast that you can't have animals everywhere pivot, so some of that grass is going to get ahead of you. So how do you deal with that? We tried several different things, as far as just kind of grazing right on through that big, tall, standing forage, then a little bit of mowing, top that off, kind of set that regrowth back a little bit, get some good fresh leafy material for the animals to graze. Both of them have positive and negative benefits, issues associated with cost associated with mowing, that part of it. In reality, from what we've kind of seen, probably just grazing right on through is probably not a bad idea.
Now, a certain level of compaction is very common in a grazing system. You have hooves on the soil surface, pressure being applied to that soil. However, at a certain point, bulk density can impede root growth, and this can impede the yields of your forage production. So at this point, it's really a question of management. As managers, how do we keep that bulk density through a threshold so it won't impact our yields, forage production, and profitability?
Here is the irrigation management around the cows. Not every producer is going to face what we're facing here, but we have primarily heavy clay type soils, so we have to be very concerned about soil compaction issues here when we're grazing on wet soils. So to me, that's one of the big ones. So we have to have at least 3 days of drying time between irrigations and the time we put our herd on a given paddock. So again, that makes it a big challenge as far as where the pivot is, how much water you're putting on, how much drying time there has to be before you put